Hello YouTube and fellow Star Wars collectors. On this episode of Toys All the Way, I'll be sharing my process and behind the scenes build from my latest Star Wars diorama from the animated series Star Wars Rebels, Lothal. If you're new to the channel or a fan of Star Wars collecting, be sure to smash a like on this video, remember to subscribe, ring that bell for notifications, or even become a channel member. Welcome back, gang. I've been very excited for the upcoming Ghost, which should be shipping out any day soon, and it's going to be a huge addition to the collection and something that I really wanted to add to my shelf displays for quite some time. Additionally, I'm also very happy to start seeing the Rebels crew make their way into the vintage collection as well, and because of that, I needed to create something for some of my toy photography and builds, and what else is more appropriate than the Lothal grasslands. Very, very symbolic of these characters and their struggle and just a planet that they were on all the time and really cared about. So, of course, I needed to figure out how to make some grasslands, and I think I came up with a pretty good idea for this modular set that's also kind of easy for, a newcomer to, build themselves for their Rebels display. So, with all that being said, let's take a closer look at how I made the Lothal grasslands. So the first thing you'll need for this project are some cheap paint brushes. I got these off Amazon and we'll have them linked in the description down below. Essentially, we're going to need the bristles from this brush, and this is probably the most challenging part of the project because they are definitely held on there pretty well. So you'll need some pliers to pry back the piece of aluminum, and this just takes a little bit of time, a lot of patience, and some force to just pull this thing apart and get the material that we need, which are the bristles, which will be the long grass for our Lothal diorama. As you can see, these are pretty much held onto the paintbrush with some wood glue, and we'll simply just peel these back in little bunches, and these will be the different types of long grass that we will need to complete this diorama. I would recommend using 1 to 3 brushes for this project. Moving right along, we will need to create some modular terrain for our Lothal diorama, and to do so, we will be using some XPS and just normal packing foam to create these little mounds of dirt. Either one of these foam options works just fine, and you can even use some scraps for this project. You can use a knife for this next part of the project, but I would definitely recommend using a hot wire cutter. I will have the one that I use linked in the description down below. I would also recommend doing this outside or in a well-ventilated area, and definitely wearing some type of respirator because you don't want to breathe in the toxic gases that are released when you cut foam. Take the hot wire cutter and start to shave off the sides of extra foam, creating organic shapes that will make our mounds of dirt. There is no real easy process to do this, just try to make something, kind of organic, and it will all come together in the end. And don't worry about the hard edges or any flat surfaces, as we will be covering these with grout and giving it lots of texture to make it look like a mound of dirt. Moving right along, we need to make that tall grass look a little less uniform, and to do so, I'm going to take a pair of scissors and just kind of give it a haircut so that every blade of grass is not exactly the same height. Next, we will need to attach the tufts of grass to the XPS foam, and to do so, I will be using glue sticks and a glue gun by Gorilla Glue. I will have this linked in the description down below as well. Spread the tufts of grass out evenly and try to get full coverage on the mound of XPS foam, giving different lines of sight and just thinking about how this thing would be a nice modular piece, but give you, different display options because you could rotate this piece 360 degrees in your collection. Once all the tufts of grass are applied and allowed to dry, we'll move on to the next step, which is Grout. This is my go-to by Fusion Pro. It is called Bone White, and I will have it linked in the description down below as well. If you're a fan of the channel, you may have seen me use this on a number of different diorama builds. It is my go-to for this type of situation. It has the perfect texture that just looks like a nice ground material, but you can also use this for walls, and it just has a nice concrete or stone look as well. So for this project, we're simply going to take it and dab it around all the pieces of XPS foam, covering them completely and also filling those gaps between the tufts of grass. Now this is definitely a tricky and a messy part of the project, but I would suggest using a Q-tip with a little bit of water because grout is actually pretty easy to clean off. So if you do get some on the grass and you're not happy with that look, or you just want to kind of smooth things down, you can always take a Q-tip with some water and that will help smooth everything out, but also clean off the tufts of grass. Once everything is complete to your liking, allow the grout to dry overnight for the best results. The next part of the project is to create some Lothal mountains, and to do so I'm going to use some styrofoam cones that I simply got off of Amazon and will have linked in the description down below. This is the same process as the tufts of grass, just covering these with grout and allowing them to dry overnight. And then we will be moving on to the next part, which is probably the most important part, paint. I'm going to use a series of acrylic paints by Liquitex to recreate all those lines that are seen on those classic Lothal mountains. There was no real recipe for this part of the project, but I opted to do something that's very similar to my standard go-to like wash and mix, which is pretty much using burnt umber, a dash of black, and some chromium green oxide to give it a very earthy look. I mixed everything very thoroughly, but leaning more towards the brown as that was going to be the main color for this part of the project. Using a bit of water and keeping my brush very wet, I applied some of the brown paint to the mountain. Keep in mind that you want this to be kind of a wash, if you will. It's not really painting on a hard brown line, because you want this to have that subtle effect that those Lothal mountains did have in the show. Additionally, once applied, we were going to dry brush everything together to really give it a nice subtle look, but also bake it into the side of the mountain. Repeat the same process, keeping your brush wet and then applying some of the damp lines of brown paint to the mountain, and then dry brushing them in to give them a nice weathered in effect. Similar to most steps of this project, don't think about it too much and keep everything very loose and organic. This will all come together in the end and look rather nice in my opinion. Moving right along, we're going to use a second color to apply some different lines to the Lothal mountains and give them a little bit more variety when it comes to those texture lines. I used the same exact brown color and mixed in a bit of black paint to make it a little bit darker, and then applied very thin lines to kind of accent what we already had going on, and simply worked my way up the mountain, adding these lines here and there. Once again, remember, don't think about this too much, just kind of place them wherever you think they look best, and then everything will come together once we hit this with a dry brush and just blend it all together. I repeated the same process for the other mountains, which in the end would give me one small and two large Lothal mountains. Lastly, I took some of the leftover brown paint and applied a dry brushing to the modular pieces, mostly because I wanted to give these some tonal variations and just weather them up a little bit to give them a much more natural look. With everything looking pretty good, it was time to take all these pieces and assemble our Lothal diorama. I hope you've enjoyed this video and taken a look at my behind the scenes process for my latest diorama build from the animated series Star Wars Rebels, Lothal. Feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And don't forget to smash a like on this video and subscribe if you're new to the channel. It really helps and is always greatly appreciated. Thanks everyone, and may the Force be with you.